because that was a constant refrain coming in from Donald Trump. This time we are seeing again, as you saw on that chart, where it was pointed out that the tariffs from India are almost 52%. That was the assessment that has been made by the US. And therefore, the reciprocal tariffs that they are saying imposed on India now will be about 26%. As Daniel is pointing out there quite correctly, that of course the fallout will be on consumers in the US, because anything that is exported to the US, that US imports within its own country, the importers are going to have to pay a higher price for that product, and therefore that product automatically will become more expensive for the US consumers. But this will have a destabilizing effect on those countries that are very big trade partners of the US. For instance, if I bring you back and circle you back to Canada, this could have a debilitating effect on the Canadian GDP. And Canadian economy has already been suffering lately, and we have seen the impacts on the consumers here as well, considering the inflation has been quite high, prices of daily amenities, goods has been high, there's been a housing crisis, and all these kind of tariffs, this kind of jolt that we will see to the economy could lead to long-term impacts as well in Canada. Some of the infrastructure projects could become more expensive for the Canadian side as well. So long-term projects become expensive. There could be, you will have to go to your drawing table again and redraw the budgets for them. Social development rates get impacted, weighted average cost of capital gets impacted. There are so many ramifications of this kind of tariff, which is all encompassing now. It's such an exhaustive and expansive list. And as I pointed out, because of the complex supply chains now spreading across the world, and we have seen a glimpse of that during the COVID-19 pandemic, how the supply chains came into shock because they are so complex now, spread across the globe. And any such shock to that supply chain, even by way of a tariff, can have a debilitating effect on world trade. And at the moment, even if you want to appeal this kind of tariff at the World Trade Organization, for instance, it will go into a void. That's because the World Trade Organization's appellate body has not been functioning for the past 7 years because of lack of quorum, and that too because the US has been upset with the appellate body and has not approved the appointment of judges. And that means that any appeal to the World Trade Organization will run into a void. There is an alternative mechanism for redressal that the European Union and some other countries, about 60 odd countries, have come up with that. But there are many countries that are not part of that setup. For instance, of course, the US is not there, and even India is not part of that body. So what happens now? How do these problems around world trade get negotiated, or how do you address these problems now? That, again, is a big issue at the moment.
Maha, as always, thank you so much for contextualizing the latest information for us. Daniel Blocks, thanks so much for joining us on NDTV as always. Let me just tell our viewers that Trump has dismissed concerns about how his tariffs will affect the US economy, but the move is likely to prove a political test for his administration, which was elected in part on promises to tame prices. Meanwhile, Wall Street's months-long headache over Donald Trump's plans for a global trade war is threatening to turn into a migraine as we speak. Trump's executive order subjecting imports to a 10% tariff and applying even higher levies to products from 60 other countries deemed bad actors triggered a broad sell-off in stock futures and a drop in oil prices as well. It was a sign, as people are saying, that investors are wary of how surging import costs could become a serious drag on the world economy. And some say for Trump, tariffs are not so much a negotiating tactic as a policy, a new revenue stream and a made in the USA commitment. We'll keep tracking the latest developments for you. My colleague Sakshi Bajaj joins you on the other side in a few moments. Do stay tuned.
One of the worst earthquakes hit Thailand recently. and the tragedy is still unfolding. You can see some sniffer dogs here. Authorities have told me that they had located some vital signs, but they have not been able to pull anyone out. Question as to how did the 4 Chinese nationals manage to get inside such a highly fortified area. They managed to get in. They were successful in getting some 32 documents that established that Chinese connection to this site. It's also about a larger conspiracy that could be at hand. Whether the Chinese materials were substandard, all of that will have to be investigated.
In today's interconnected world, India's voice is more crucial than ever. When India speaks, the world listens. At NDTV World, we are that voice, bringing you intelligent and insightful news from India and beyond. From geopolitics and diplomacy to economic shifts, migrations, tech disruptions, and the stories of our diaspora. We cover the news that shapes our global future. NDTV World, your new home for global news, is here.
When we spoke the last time you were in India, you did mention that you've actually spent more time in India than American universities. I remember you saying that, and a lot of your thought process has been conditioned by the time you've spent in India. Those formative years, they really shaped you. What, according to you, has been your biggest takeaway from your experiences and learnings during your time in India?
Well, I grew up with Indians. From the age of 5, I was surrounded by Indians. This was a boarding school. So morning, noon, and night, we had Indian friends. Our teachers were all Indian. And as such, Indian values would have automatically permeated within me and shaped me. But more precisely, it is in the classroom. We studied Indian history, ancient history, in civilization, medieval India, modern India, the fight to independence. So all of this would have shaped me, the person I am, and my worldview. But if you ask me one specific thing that has really had a lasting impression on me, it is the National Cadet Corps, NCC. So I took part in the NCC, and I enjoyed every moment in the NCC. And every year we would look forward to taking part in the Independence Day, 15th August March Past in the Mela ground in town with all the other schools and the NCC cadets of all the other schools. The deep, indelible mark it had left on me is one of nation building. How we must work together to take our nation forward.
As US President Donald Trump signs the executive order on global reciprocal tariffs, we have seen global markets plunge. We've seen Dow futures tumble 1,000 points, S&P 500 futures slide over 3.5%, as well as Nasdaq futures decline over 4%. Asian markets have also tumbled sharply, with Japan's Nikkei declining over 4% and South Korean shares declining over 2% in early trade. Meanwhile, gold prices hit a record high and are clearly thriving on safe haven demand. I am joined by Ajay Bagga, senior market expert, to of course make sense of the markets and the economy, oil prices as well as gold prices. Ajay Bagga, markets plunging on expected lines and Trump clearly going ahead with his plan.
Yeah, it's worse than the worst case scenario that has happened. We were expecting a universal reciprocal tariff around 20%. So that has come at 10%. But the country level tariffs are a big shock, especially on China, a 54% all consolidated tariff. On Vietnam, a 46% tariff. On entire Europe, 20%. India, 26%. Most of Southeast Asia are getting a tariff. 60 countries getting tariffed. And even small countries like Laos, Cambodia getting 30% plus. Norfolk Island, which is an island, which is a territory of Australia with a population of 2,000, gets a tariff of 29%. There is no comparison between a small enclave of 2,000 people and the US economy. So this is not a well thought out position. And unfortunately, to run global affairs like this, that I have made my move, now you come on the poker table and you lay down your cards, let's negotiate. That's not the way to run international relations. Secondly, that's not the best thing for the global economy. Markets are just reflecting the pain in the global economy caused by this once in 100 years kind of a tariff war that has got unleashed last night.
Right, like you said, this is of course reflecting the fact that there is more room for negotiation going forward. But what about the sectoral impact as far as India is concerned? Many were expecting announcements for pharma. Now that hasn't happened. So will this be a boost for the pharma sector in India?
No, not at all. If you see the White House declaration, they have said copper, pharma, semiconductors are going to come under sector-specific tariffs. So they have been kept out of the country-specific tariffs. Sakshi, you must remember, Ireland, with a population of 5 million, is exporting $100 billion of pharma products to the US. That is the biggest thing rankling Trump, that why have American pharma majors headquartered in Ireland and they have set up factories there. He wants them to come back home. So you are going to see 25% tariffs on pharma as well. So Indian pharma, there is no escape. Either you get the country 26% or you get this 25%. But pharma tariff is definitely coming. So no way out. In terms of sectors, today metals are falling across the Asian region. Oil is down. Only thing up is gold. Only thing up is yen. And Japanese government bonds are seeing buying. The yields are going down. Those are the safe haven buying that is happening. US treasuries are down quite sharply. The yields on US treasuries. So people are rushing into US treasuries. Asian currencies are down. China has to still fix its currency. They had drawn a line, Sakshi, of 7.2 yuan to the dollar. They were protecting that. Today, in the offshore market, it has crossed 7.3. The risk is that Chinese allow their currency to depreciate, as they did in 2000 and 2019, 2018 and 2019, which led to a global stock market sell-off, because all the emerging markets then, to stay competitive export-wise, also follow suit and depreciate currencies. So you could be seeing a currency war starting. We have to wait and watch. But overall, I think there'll be a massive sell-off. Japan opened 4% down, then we have seen some amount of stability there. If you look at Chinese ETF, the internet ETF, which is the biggest one, $8 billion China internet ETF, that's down 6% this morning. Vietnam country ETF, the biggest one, is down 10%. Those are offshore funds who are just taking their money out, but that will translate into selling in those markets as those markets open very shortly.
Absolutely. So no respite sectorally, as well as global currencies being impacted. But between India and US tariff differentials have been significant as far as agriculture, auto and the jewelry sector have been concerned. So your thoughts on the impact now given for these sectors at large?
Yeah, it is a drag on the profitability of all these companies, and a minimum 10% has been set. So the baseline is you cannot escape below 10%. So the best deal we can look for is 26% going to 10. Now, if you look at this 52% that they have allegedly said that India levies, that includes GST, that includes non-tariff barriers and what they call currency manipulation. Now, all those are subjective things. GST is our own internal matter, which we levy on classes of goods. We don't levy on origin of goods. To add in a GST of 18 to 28%, and calculate tariffs that India levies. India is actually levying 12 to 13% on a weighted average basis on US goods, and US is levying 2.5%. So we were expecting at most a 5 to 10% country level, or a worst case scenario was 20% universal tariffs. What has come instead is 26% country level tariffs for India. One good thing is it's much better than Vietnam, which sits at 46, or China at 54, or even Bangladesh at 37%, Sakshi. So, but this is just the negotiation Act 1. You have to go to Act 5 of this drama, which is painful. And as investors, we have to unnecessarily go through this pain. That is what is spoiling the mood globally this morning.
Right, investor reaction and of course negotiation being the key word from you, but we are also joined by Badri Narayanan, Gopalakrishnan, senior economist, to make sense of what is happening. Badri Narayanan, you know, a lot of people have been talking about India needs to boost export market diversification. Now, given the tariff spree, your thoughts on whether India should go ahead with this as sooner than expected?
Thank you for having me here. I agree with Mr. Ajay Baga that this is a very sad and kind of shocking news for us this morning. In terms of our exposure to US, it's definitely substantial. It's one of our major export markets. And this kind of tariffs are going to be difficult for us. Like he said, we do have, we are still better than China, Vietnam, and other countries. But at the same time, compared to the countries with whom US already has free trade agreements, and many other countries for whom the tariffs have been 10% or definitely lower than ours, we are going to be at a disadvantage. So yes, in terms of diversification, it is good idea to look at multiple markets to diversify, and our industries are already doing that. The US has in the past few years become quite a cost-sensitive market. So many of our exporters are actually looking at EU and Middle East and other regions for exports. But still, I'm only talking in marginal terms. In the majority, a large chunk of our exports are still going to the US. So it's a very important market. Whatever diversification we do, we still are going to have US as an important partner. And that is where you talked about negotiation. That is where our negotiation strategy right now, where we are, our entire colleagues in the Ministry of Commerce, Department of Commerce, they are working on this negotiation with the Trump administration on an FTA that is being negotiated. I think, like Ajay mentioned, it's like even the Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent mentioned a few months ago about the strategy of escalation to de-escalate. So escalate the tariffs and then bring partners to negotiate and then reduce the tariffs. So that is a strategy.
Right.
And
thank you
maybe
so much for sharing your thoughts, both of you. And of course, 2 new strategies and negotiations going forward.
Meanwhile, in news just coming in, Prime Minister Modi has an action-packed schedule for this week. He is going to be in Thailand for the BIMSTEC summit. He is just departing for Bangkok. In fact, during this trip, he will hold talks with his Thai counterpart, Paetongtarn Shinawatra, and attend the 6th BIMSTEC summit. Prime Minister Modi is scheduled to meet Shinawatra at the Government House, where he will be accorded a ceremonial welcome, is what his team has informed us. And this evening, our Prime Minister will join the BIMSTEC leaders from Thailand, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Nepal, Myanmar and Bhutan to oversee the signing of the Agreement on Maritime Cooperation. This BIMSTEC summit, you must note, will bring Prime Minister Modi face-to-face with Nepal's Prime Minister KP Sharma Oli, Bangladesh Chief Advisor Mohammad Yunus and Myanmar military junta leader Min Aung Hlaing, among others. Now on Friday, which is tomorrow, Prime Minister Modi will call on the Thai king as well. Meanwhile, Prime Minister Modi and Shinawatra are scheduled to visit one of the top 6 temples in Thailand that is famous for its massive reclining Buddha statue. This is part of his scheduled tour. The Prime Minister will attend the summit on Friday morning, where the regional grouping is expected to also adopt the Bangkok Vision 2030. We'll, of course, be tracking everything that's happening at this BIMSTEC summit very closely. For now, we're stepping into a very short break. Back in a moment. Don't go anywhere.
One of the worst earthquakes hit Thailand recently, and the tragedy is still unfolding. You can see some sniffer dogs here. Authorities have told me that they had located some vital signs, but they have not been able to pull anyone out. Question as to how did the 4 Chinese nationals manage to get inside such a highly fortified area. They managed to get in. They were successful in getting some 32 documents that established that Chinese connection to this site. It's also about a larger conspiracy that could be at hand. Whether the Chinese materials were substandard, all of that will have to be investigated.
In today's interconnected world, India's voice is more crucial than ever. When India speaks, the world listens. At NDTV World, we are that voice, bringing you intelligent and insightful news from India and beyond. From geopolitics and diplomacy to economic shifts, migrations, tech disruptions, and the stories of our diaspora. We cover the news that shapes our global future. NDTV World, your new home for global news, is here.
The neighborhood that we are in right now, you take what's happening around us, whether it's Bangladesh or some other countries, there are violent revolutions that are taking place, all in an effort towards democracy. How do you view that, especially in the context of Bhutan's history being completely opposite of that, and you have the advantage of history, apart from, of course, leadership lessons?
So this is exactly the point I've been trying to make, and especially to our own people. Let's treasure what we have, and especially to the youth of Bhutan. In our region, whether it's India, Bangladesh you just mentioned, Nepal, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Maldives, Afghanistan, some places don't even have democracy yet. But wherever there's democracy, even in India, it was a product of bloodshed, of sacrifice, of revolution. In Bhutan, it was a product of enlightened leaders imposing it on a reluctant people in a time of peace and prosperity, unprecedented stability. And this makes Bhutanese democracy, Bhutan's democracy, absolutely unique.
Absolutely, sir, it does.
Welcome back. Well, Donald Trump has probably not read much Foucault, but he appears to embody the French philosopher's claim, as some analysts argue, that politics is the continuation of war by other means. Nowhere is this more apparent than in his fondness for tariffs. He presents taxing foreign imports as a way to rebuild the American economy, as you've seen with his latest announcements, in favor of blue-collar workers left behind by free trade and globalization, as you've seen from his remarks on the matter as well. Yet, some argue that it seems he plainly thinks that politics is not about truth or justice. It's about leverage and supremacy. But Donald Trump has listed the high tariffs charged by India on American products as he announced reciprocal tariffs on countries across the board, declaring a 26% discounted reciprocal tariff on India, as I have mentioned. The US president said the United States charges other countries only a 2.4% tariff on motorcycles. Meanwhile, Thailand and others are charging much higher rates, like 60%. India charges 70%, Vietnam charges 75%, and others charge even higher rates. But as he announced these tariffs, he held up a chart that showed the tariffs that countries such as India, China, the United Kingdom, and the European Union charge along with the reciprocal tariffs that these countries will now have to pay. In fact, we're going to pull those visuals up of you, of Donald Trump holding those tariff charts up. That chart indicated that India charged 56% tariffs. In fact, my team will just pull those visuals up for you. The chart that he was holding up indicated that India charged 56% tariffs, including currency manipulation and trade barriers, and America would now charge India a discounted reciprocal tariff of 26%. Well, for further clarity on the India impact, we have with us at the moment Asif Iqbal, President, Indian Economic Trade Organization, and also the former consul government of the Republic of Suriname. Thank you so much, sir, for joining us as always. India has been a significant beneficiary of trade with the US. It's no secret. So how might the new tariffs disrupt this trade balance? And what long-term consequences could this have on Indian businesses, sir?
Thank you, Pali. Now I feel that our tariffs that we have got is not as much as compared to what you look at China, because our total trade is 124 billion, and our exports have reached around 81 billion, whereas the imports are only 44 billion. So we are in a safe side, which is a trade surplus of around almost 37 billion. But it is not as bad as we think, because it is not a generalized tariff effect on India. It's only sector specific. Especially for the automotive and IT. These are the two sectors that can mainly be affected. But apart from that, in general, it is not as much as, if you compare to other countries that he has imposed upon. And, if you look at it, our security concerns, they are not going to be as big as they seem to be. So I think we are in a very safe area this time.
But sir, Trump's comments that India has been tough on tariffs raised questions about the future of Indo-US relations as well. So would you argue that this tariff increase could escalate tensions between our two nations, or will it prompt more collaboration on trade reforms?
No, you see, Mr. Trump has very clearly said that, the Prime Minister is a great friend of his. So he's trying to make it look very personal and trying to keep it very balanced in a way that, the tariffs are there. The Prime Minister is a great friend of his, but at the same time, he has to impose this tariff. So that itself gives us a kind of balance, because he has not said this to any other country. He has not said this to China, Korea, or any other country, or Germany, but he has said this specifically with India. So it looks like a very soft approach that he wants to keep it balanced and, keep India also in line with all other countries, but at the same time giving that very soft touch that he has given it for India. And he's already clearly mentioned the Prime Minister is a great friend of mine, which clearly says India is a great friend of US, and these tariffs are just temporary.
Keeping that in mind, what role do you think India's diplomatic ties or diplomatic channels will then play with the US in negotiating to reduce these tariffs? Is there space for compromise, or would you say this is a major setback currently for India's trade policy?
The Ministry of Commerce in India, they have been evaluating several possibilities based on these, tariff disparities and specific types, of various countries.
In fact, what has been back and forth from the US as well.
Yes, and we've also been in discussions with local industries to address these non-tariff barriers that can that can affect their exports to the US. And India has also expressed our willingness, to order more tariff cuts on more than half of US imports worth almost 23 billion. And that will be a very big concession in years. And I think we look forward to a very positive, kind of approach to this particular tariff announcement.
Mr. Iqbal, before I let you go, what specific steps should India then take to mitigate the adverse effects as we speak of these tariffs on its economy? Should we look for alternative markets or diversify our export portfolio?
Well, we already have, some response coming from the neighboring country like China, saying that India, they are ready to buy more goods from us. That's a very kind of a collateral benefit that we have, that many neighboring countries and many other countries nearby will start, building and deepening their relations with us, which is good for the Indian, economy and the Indian exporters.
Right, well, we'll wait and watch how this entire impact unfolds. As you know, Donald Trump has said that Narendra Modi is a friend, but has also criticized the very high tariffs that India has imposed as far as US goods are concerned. Mr. Iqbal, thank you so much for joining us on NDTV.
Thank you.
The US president has announced a baseline 10% tariff on US imports, with steeper reciprocal levies on goods from a slew of other nations, including us in India, Europe, Japan, and China. And you know why it's a big deal? Because Trump's announcement ends the free trade era that has defined global commerce for decades. A move that now risks higher consumer prices and economic damage as well. But in terms of the numbers, The reciprocal tariffs hit dozens of nations, including some of US's largest trading partners. Donald Trump listed the high tariffs charged by India on American products as he announced reciprocal tariffs on countries across the board, for us declaring a 26% discounted reciprocal tariff. Imports, meanwhile, from the European Union, Japan and South Korea will be subject to tariffs of about 20% or higher. Imports from Vietnam are subject to a tariff rate of 46%, while Taiwanese imports will face 32% tariffs. Now, you need to keep a keen eye on the fact that it is President Trump's gamble to revive domestic manufacturing, raise revenues to offset tax cut costs, and also push other nations to adhere to non-trade related demands. Trump's reciprocal tariffs decision promises to ruffle feathers worldwide, as we've already seen with the initial responses as nations are bracing for this economic storm. But for further clarity on the matter, I now have the pleasure of being joined by Andrew Leung, who's an international and independent China strategist based in Hong Kong, also joining us on the broadcast at the moment, founder and CEO of US-India Corridor, Angela Jadkar, live from New York. Thank you so much for making time for us and joining us on NDTV. Andrew, to you first. China, one of the United States' largest trading partners, is going to be hit with a new 54% tariff, India with 26% among many others. Would you say we're in the middle of a global trade war now, as many experts have highlighted?
Clearly, this is a completely overturning a new page in trading relationship of the United States with the rest of the world. It's not just targeting a number of large countries or traders like China, but also Americans' allies and friends. It is so-called reciprocal tariffs based on, for example, existing tariffs in a number of countries, even though they are not the largest trading partner of the United States, even though they're friends, which of course could include India, but also it's across the board. Now, Trump believes that tariffs could bring back prosperity to the United States, but this is his rhetoric. And then he thinks that tariffs could bring jobs back to the United States without realizing that, of course, the costs of production of a lot of these products in the United States are no longer competitive. And that's why these productions have been outsourced to other more competitive countries. That's Adam Smith's comparative advantage. But it's going to completely disregard that. And of course, the degree of tariffs is calibrated in relation to what extent that country accounts for imports into the United States. Now, the biggest country imports is, of course, China, Canada, Mexico. But, for example, India, of course, in terms of the relative import is less, and hence the tariffs are relatively less severe compared with other countries. But even a close airline now, Vietnam, as it's pointed out, is huge tariffs. So I think this upends the whole world's trading relationship, upends the whole world's supply and value chain, causes inflation around the world because of all the higher costs, and of course resulting in huge costs to American consumers. And then various traders, including Goldman Sachs, have already predicted a high likelihood of an American stagflation, if not immediate recession. And then these tariffs hark back to the time of the so-called Smooth Act, the tariffs back in the 1930s, which deepened the American recession. So that's highly worrying. But at least Trump believes that the immediate term would result in additional revenue to the United States, would bring back certain jobs to the United States, and would create a golden age of the United States economy dictated by oligarchs and entrepreneurs.
In fact, Angela is also with us now, Andrew. Angela, what role do you think India's diplomatic ties with the US will play in negotiating to reduce these tariffs? As we speak, you think there's any space for compromise? Or is this a major setback for India's trade policy, as many experts are arguing?
Okay, good morning to you. Good morning, India. So I actually think that, the conversations just are ongoing. I think that if you saw how the U.S. markets had responded, they didn't respond well as President Trump was speaking.
Yes.
Because the tariffs were much higher than expected that were imposed. Now, the markets do not like uncertainty. Markets want clarity. And from what I understand, there was very little clarity that was provided. So it puts companies, multinationals, in a very difficult position.
Absolutely.
And just responding very quickly to what you were saying, yes, I think, this is the art of the deal. And Trump will be Trump, and he will continue to negotiate. But what he understands, and CEOs understand, that you have to be really sensitive in the words that you choose and how you and be very measured when you're communicating, because the markets are very sensitive. So I think he is just going to continue to negotiate. I think this is shock treatment. I think there's going to be a lot of negotiating that's going to happen behind closed doors. If you noticed, Canada and Mexico, that's been in the news for months, have not been mentioned today.
In fact,
and so, yes, go ahead.
Leaders from Europe to Latin America actually criticizing the tariffs as economically damaging as we speak. Andrew, just want to bring you in for a quick moment here. You think these tariffs will force countries to reevaluate their dependency on the US market, leading to a potential reorganization of global trade alliances and partnerships?
Well, naturally, a number of many countries are already recalibrating their trading and, if you like, even geopolitical relationship with the United States. Not that they would just change cam entirely, but then the people are starting to hedge. And even long-time allies like European countries and Canada and even a closest neighbor like Mexico are already recalibrating their response. On the one hand, like Canada and Mexico, are trying to impose retaliatory measures as a negotiation tactic, if you like, because if you just take everything lying down, and then your national interest could be compromised. Right. Likewise, other countries. So I think that we are seeing trade shifting to perhaps the global south, and then the realignment of trading relationships even between India and China, between Europe and China. Not that they are going to embrace the panda, but on the other hand, they're going to hedge, they're going to seek out areas of a possible cooperation and possible partnerships.
Well, as we wrap, Angela, so you think these decisions will isolate the US economically?
So what I actually think is I just want to focus for a second on the business community because it's very much part of the discussion. So multinationals, companies, publicly traded companies, are having difficulty in business planning. And, we're also thinking about, when they're making decisions, it's not like they're making decisions on their own. They're part of a bigger ecosystem of stakeholders. Take, for example, the auto sector and the exposure that the auto sector has to, in markets like Canada and Mexico. And so now, if we're thinking now about reshoring, nearshoring, friendshoring, that, takes time. But if you think about the US-India relationship, I think naturally multinationals that already have a presence in India and markets like India will continue to expand in India. and also rethink their U.S. strategy, which would also include the reskilling of American workforce in the United States.
All right.
It also, take time to recreate these new supply chains and also de-risk. Companies are planning on, thinking about de-risking.
All right.
Away from the U.S. And also diversifying their talent pool. Vietnam was on the list.
Well, many don't have an optimistic view at this moment, though. We are still awaiting for clarity on how this will play out. But Angela and Andrew, I'm afraid I'm completely out of time on this bulletin.
Yes.
Thank you so much for making time for us and joining us on NDTV. Really appreciate it. News and updates continue in a moment. Do stay tuned.
One of the worst earthquakes hit Thailand recently, and the tragedy is still unfolding. You can see some sniffer dogs here. Authorities have told me that they had located some vital signs, but they have not been able to pull anyone out. Question as to how did the 4 Chinese nationals manage to get inside such a highly fortified area. They managed to get in. They were successful in getting some 32 documents that established that Chinese connection to this site. It's also about a larger conspiracy that could be at hand, whether the Chinese materials were substandard. All of that will have to be investigated.
When we spoke the last time you were in India, you did mention that you've actually spent more time in India than American universities. I remember you saying that, and a lot of your thought process has been conditioned by the time you've spent in India. Those formative years, they really shaped you. What, according to you, has been your biggest takeaway from your experiences and learnings during your time in India?
Well, I grew up with Indians. From the age of 5, I was surrounded by Indians. This was a boarding school. So morning, noon, and night, we had Indian friends. Our teachers were all Indian. And as such, Indian values would have automatically permeated within me and shaped me. But more precisely, it is in the classroom. We studied Indian history, ancient history, in civilization, medieval India, modern India, the fight to independence. So all of this would have shaped me, the person I am, and my worldview. But if you ask me one specific thing that has really had a lasting impression on me, it is the National Cadet Corps, NCC. So I took part in the NCC, and I enjoyed every moment in the NCC. And every year we would look forward to taking part in the Independence Day, 15th August March Past in the Mela ground in town with all the other schools and the NCC cadets of all the other schools. The deep, indelible mark it had left on me is one of nation building. How we must work together to take our nation forward.
This is NDTV, and you're watching NDTV 24x7.
April 2nd, 2025. In a few moments, I will sign a historic executive order instituting reciprocal tariffs on countries throughout the world.
A very good morning. You're watching NDTV 24x7 and I'm Priyanka Das. And all eyes today are on President Trump's tariffs. We'll get you all the details in a few moments, but first, a quick check of the top headlines. President Trump imposes 26% reciprocal tariffs on India, says Prime Minister Modi a great friend amid sweeping tariff changes. President Trump imposes 34% on China, 36% on Thailand and 46% on Vietnam. Asian countries face the maximum brunt. World leaders condemn US President Donald Trump's tariffs. Global markets plunge on President Trump's tariff spree. Lok Sabha clears Waqf bill late night, bill to be tabled in the Rajya Sabha today. Prime Minister Modi leaves for Thailand for the BIMSTEC summit. US President Donald Trump unveils sweeping reciprocal tariffs, announcing baseline 10% duties on all imports and much higher rates for some of the nations. Trump singled out major US partners for imposing trade barriers he deems as unfair, with India and the European Union facing 26% and 20% tariffs. They do it to us and we do it to them. This is what Trump has said. He also announced a staggering 34% tariff on goods from China in his Liberation Day speech. Railing against foreign cheaters and foreign scavengers, President Trump said that the US will charge an import duty of 26% on India and 34% on China. Speaking about India, President Trump described the tariffs by New Delhi as very, very tough. He went on to say that Prime Minister Modi is a great friend of mine, but you have not been treating us right. India charges us 52%, and so we will charge them half of that, that's 26%.
Tariffs give our country protection against those that would do us economic harm, and many people were looking to do us economic harm. Maybe not so obviously, but they were doing tremendous economic harm. But even more importantly, they will give us growth. These tariffs are going to give us growth like you haven't seen before, and it'll be something very special. I think you're going to remember today. It's going to be a free nation that we're dealing with. We're going to have a very free and beautiful nation. It's going to be Liberation Day in America, and it's going to be a day that hopefully you're going to look back in years to come and you're going to say, you know, he was right. This has turned out to be one of the most important days in the history of our country. India, very, very tough, very, very tough. The Prime Minister just left, and he's a great friend of mine, but I said, you're a friend of mine, but you're not treating us right. They charge us 52%. You have to understand, we charge them almost nothing.
Let's go across to Mr. Jayant Krishna, who's joining us live on the broadcast. Mr. Krishna, firstly, just help us understand, now that the tariffs have been announced, what economic consequences will India have?
See, to my mind, it's unfortunate, first of all, what has happened, because, our bilateral trade agreement was getting discussed, and there's a closure date of September 2025 for that. Recently, Rajesh Agarwal, the Additional Secretary, Ministry of Commerce, and Brendan Lynch, the Assistant U.S. Trade Representative, they have been discussing for 4 or 5 days, So discussions were happening. It comes all of a sudden. And let's also understand, see, where does this 52% come from? In the US TR report, which was tabled in the US on 31st of March, very clearly they talked about an average Indian tariff of 17%. And they said the non-agro is 13.5 and agro is 39. So how does that 17 become 52 is anybody's guess. In fact, in the US statements, they have said that the base rate that they have talked about, and in most countries they have halved that, calling it a discounted reciprocal rate. It has not only the tariff, but also including the currency manipulation, which India doesn't do at all, and trade barriers, which some of them are there for India vis-a-vis India also. I think all these factors have been taken into consideration, not just the tariff in absolute terms, the average tariff. So I think To my mind, India should not retaliate by any very volatile in any volatile manner. To my mind, India should study it and look at the impact on a few sector and then carry on the negotiations. But because once this BTA, the bilateral trade agreement, it gets signed, this would in all probability overtake these discounted reciprocal tariffs that President Trump has announced on the Liberation Day. And now coming to your question of what sectors will be impacted, it's too early. But I think some sectors which are very, very clear will be impacted are steel and other metals, chemicals, jewelry. These will have a direct impact. And some other sectors which are exposed to this tariff hike by the US are automobile, pharmaceuticals, and agriculture, agro-produce, and food products. These are likely to be impacted, but we still have to see that this average rate that he has talked about, 26%. What does it boil down to in terms of by way of different product categories? Because I refuse to believe that this is a uniform rate across the spectrum. That can't be the case at all. So I think it remains to be seen. But let me also tell you, in the same breath, some experts say that at this tariff structure at 26%, almost half of the Indian trade to the Indian exports to the US will be affected. But that may be true. But at the same time, it will also open a window of opportunities for India vis-a-vis other countries. Because look at the countries where this imposition of tariff is higher than India. China, it is 34%, right? South Korea is almost the same, 25%. Vietnam is 46%. Taiwan is 32%. Japan is very close, almost 24%. Thailand is 36%. Switzerland is 31%. So I think these are opportunities which get thrown to India. We need to evaluate it quickly and take the early movers advantage. Because many other countries also will not be competitive to export to the US now, given these tariff barriers. So I think India should look upon this as an opportunity also. But very quickly, we don't have much time because everybody, like India, most countries which are impacted will be looking upon other global opportunities. To my mind, this will recalibrate, the theory of competitive advantage of nations and of companies and of product categories. India will have to look at it very, very differently. It's like recalibrating the entire trade spectrum all over the world. One needs to look at it very, very closely.
I'd also like to bring in Michael Owens, who is Georgia's mayor. Mr. Owen, help us understand, is this move really the correct path for the Trump administration going ahead to make the America Great Again campaign? How is that likely to play out? Is that the perfect strategy going ahead?
First of all, thanks for having me on. We really can't talk about what the perfect strategy is here. What we do know is that what's being called Liberation Day, in a lot of people's minds, Inflation Day, right? It means that this intention on bolstering U.S. jobs and having this America First stance that the president has taken has really mean that we're going to see a sharp increase in many different American goods, automobiles, home goods, construction costs, across the board, you name it. And, we've seen impacts, obviously, with the U.S. markets. And I can tell you that in cities, in my city and cities across Georgia and across the country, looking at local economies, facing this type of downturn where industries will struggle to adjust, dealing with increased prices, I can't see how this is going to play out best when looking at what our local users and what our local families are going to see.
Right, Mr. Owens. I'll also like to bring in Mr. Krishna on the broadcast. Mr. Krishna, what impact do you think will it have on the MSMEs and SMEs, which have, for the large part, been export-oriented? How are they likely to be impacted?
So MSMEs, directly also they are big exporters. And also as a supply chain for the large units, in India. So, some products may be exported by the large companies, large manufacturers. But, a lot of input for that, the raw materials and some assemblies or some components there may come from MSMEs. So MSMEs will be impacted hugely. And some of them may not even have the comfort level of, looking at alternatives, because they're smaller in size, they don't have deep pockets, and have to a lesser extent, they can bear such risks, So I think MSMEs will be impacted more, to my mind, than the large corporates, because large corporates will have a basket of products, a basket of divisions, and very few companies are totally dependent, in their operations on the US, on the export to US. So I think MSMEs will be impacted more, and let us understand MSMEs for a country as a whole, they are very, very sizable. They account for almost 11% of the manufacturing workforce works in the MSME sector, and a very, very significant contributor, if memory doesn't fail me, almost 29% to the GDP of the country. I think the entire, this is such a radical, all, calculations we had done, or some other experts had done, of 10% or 20% reciprocal tariff, and what will be the impact on US, Indian exports to the US. But this has taken everybody off guard, and I think it needs to be seen. But I think we have to really keep on negotiating till the BTA gets signed in September, and also keep looking at other opportunities elsewhere, because every country almost worth the name is affected in the world, and we have to look upon this as an opportunity rather than just drown ourselves in gloom.
Right, Mr. Krishna, thank you. I'd also like to bring in Dr. Brahma Chelani also, who's joining us on the broadcast. He's a strategic affairs expert. Mr. Chelani, help me understand here. Now, President Trump has said that India has one of the highest tariffs. And he, of course, made a comment which is not the most positive in its nature, but he also praised Prime Minister Modi. So do you think comments like that would potentially hurt the bilateral relations?
Well, he's clearly playing tariff roulette. He's exerting increasing pressure on trading partners. Some of the tariffs are designed to be a negotiating tool. Other tariffs are expected to stay in place as a regular source of revenue for the US to help cut the trade deficit and balance the budget. The larger objectives behind Trump's tariff war are to beat back the flood of imports and force American companies to invest in domestic production capacity and bring supply chains back to the US. But here is the irony of it, that he has already imposed several rounds of tariffs since he returned to the White House, starting from early February. Now, before the latest tariffs that he announced, the average tariff rate in the US went up to 12%. Now, with the latest announcement of reciprocal tariffs, that figure increases to 20% or more. That would approach levels that the US has not seen since the early 1930s. And those high tariffs in the early 1930s contributed to deepening the Great Repression. And another interesting aspect, the irony, is that India's tariff structure, tariff rates, have fallen sharply since 1991. They have fallen from 125% to below 5% on most goods imported from the United States. But you see how much higher the American tariffs are. And unlike most Asian economies, India has its own overall trade deficit to worry about. India has a large trade deficit with the world, just the way the US has a large trade deficit with the world.
Yep.
The US trade deficit with the world, of course, is the world's biggest at $1.2 trillion. But that amounts to less than 4% of America's economy. By contrast, India's trade deficit with the world is over 10% of India's GDP. And I think these reciprocal tariffs that Trump has slapped on India will only further increase this deficit the deficit of India in terms of its GDP. And this will have a bearing on the value of India's rupee.
Right, Dr. Chelani. All right, thank you so much. Very special guests sharing their insights. Thank you so much. We'll keep coming to you to get the latest, and thank you again for your insights. Now moving on to the next story that we're tracking, that's Prime Minister Narendra Modi, who is landing in Bangkok on a two-day visit to Thailand. Now during this, he'll also hold talks with his Thai counterpart Paetongtarn Shinawatra and attend the 6th BIMSTEC summit. Modi is scheduled to also meet Shinawatra at the Government House, where he will be accorded a ceremonial welcome. In fact, on Thursday evening, the Prime Minister will join the BIMSTEC leaders from Thailand, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Nepal, Myanmar and Bhutan to oversee the signing of the Agreement on Maritime Cooperation. The BIMSTEC summit will bring Modi face-to-face with Nepal Prime Minister KP Sharma Oli, Bangladesh Chief Advisor Muhammad Yunus and Myanmar military junta leader, among others. It's time for us to take a short commercial break. Lots more coming up on the other side. Stay tuned.
One of the worst earthquakes hit Thailand recently, and the tragedy is still unfolding. You can see some sniffer dogs here. Authorities have told me that they had located some vital signs, but they have not been able to pull anyone out. Question as to how did the 4 Chinese nationals manage to get inside such a highly fortified area. They managed to get in. They were successful in getting some 32 documents that established that Chinese connection to this site. It's also about a larger conspiracy that could be at hand. Whether the Chinese materials were substandard, all of that will have to be investigated.
From interesting tech startups to industry-leading companies, politics, sports, culture, curry, cricket. Oh, there's so much to talk about. Like me, if you too thrive on interesting conversations, this is a show you cannot miss. Watch this space to know more about all matters and all people that make Britain what it is today. Out of Britain, with me, Radhika Iyer.
When we spoke the last time you were in India, you did mention that you've actually spent more time in India than American universities. I remember you saying that, and a lot of your thought process has been conditioned by the time you've spent in India. Those formative years, they really shaped you. What, according to you, has been your biggest takeaway from your experiences and learnings during your time in India?
Well, I grew up with Indians. From the age of 5, I was surrounded by Indians. This was a boarding school. So morning, noon, and night, we had Indian friends. Our teachers were all Indian. And as such, Indian values would have automatically permeated within me and shaped me. But more precisely, it is in the classroom. We studied Indian history, ancient history, in civilization, medieval India, modern India, the fight to independence. So all of this would have shaped me, the person I am, and my worldview. But if you ask me one specific thing that has really had a lasting impression on me, it is the National Cadet Corps, NCC. So I took part in the NCC, and I enjoyed every moment in the NCC. And every year we would look forward to taking part in the Independence Day, 15th August March past in the Mela ground in town with all the other schools and the NCC cadets of all the other schools. The deep, indelible mark it had left on me is one of nation building. How we must work together to take our nation forward.
An Indian Air Force Jaguar two-seater aircraft airborne from Jamnagar airfield crashed during a night mission. The pilots faced a technical malfunction and initiated ejection, avoiding harm to airfield and local population. Unfortunately, One pilot succumbed to his injuries while the other is receiving medical treatment at a hospital in Jamnagar. The Indian Air Force deeply regrets the loss of life and stands firmly with the bereaved family. Let's go across to my colleague Vishnu Som, who's joining us on the broadcast. Vishnu, what has really happened with this crash?
Well, you read out what took place, and frankly, there's not very much more to add to that. This is a Jaguar fighter bomber. This is a twin-seat variant of the jet, which has been in service with the Indian Air Force from the 70s onwards. It's been upgraded over a period of time. There was an ejection which took place in the Jamnagar area because of a technical malfunction. Remember, we'll never get to know the actual reasons of the crash. Very rarely are findings of a crash or the court of inquiry, the details of that revealed in the case of military aircraft. One pilot was able to eject successfully and was taken to a local hospital with injuries. The other pilot unfortunately succumbed to their injuries. So there is obviously a court of inquiry, which is a military court of inquiry, which is looking to the reasons in this crash, but a very sad loss of the life of a fighter pilot.
Vishnu, thank you so much for getting us the details on the Jamnagar air crash that has been reported. Moving on to the next story that we're closely tracking, that is the Waqf Amendment Bill 2025. This was cleared in the majority in the Lok Sabha late night after an over 12-hour debate that saw a sharp exchange of views between the government and the opposition. The bill now seeks to improve the administration of the Waqf properties, introduce technology-driven management, address the complexities and ensure transparency. During the debate, Union Home Minister Amit Shah targeted the Congress for allegedly spreading misinformation on the bill and assured that the legislation does not seek to interfere in the Muslims' religious matters. We have a host of reactions coming in. Let's take a look.
हमें संतोष है कि ऐतिहासिक निर्णय हुआ है, वक्फ बिल पारित हो गया है और बड़ा सवाल ये है कि वक्फ की संपत्ति जनता के उपयोग में आएगी या कुछ के उपयोग में आएगी। आज के संशोधन से ये गरीब, बेवा, अनाथ बच्चे, महिलाएं, बाकी सबों के लिए इसका उपयोग होगा।
At the end of the day, the government prevailed by a fairly small majority of about 50 votes. It wasn't, I must say, an easy matter. There were very strong views expressed on all sides of the debate. I myself did not speak in the debate, but I can tell you that that as far as Parliament is concerned, a very thorough airing of all the issues was heard.
Bill passed narrowly. There was a difference of only 56 votes. The bills passed with yeses being 288, noes being 232. I think we put all the points that the people of India wanted us to put. Right now, we are unhappy with the result, but we will continue to fight to defend the Constitution, to protect the rights of minority institutions, and we're going to make sure and be vigilant that this bill is not misused to create a further law and order situation in the country.
महत्वपूर्ण बिल था और ऐतिहासिक बिल था और एक बहुत बड़ा रिफॉर्म है सबको न्याय देने के लिए और जो पेंडिंग केसेस है ट्रिब्यूनल में, कोर्ट में, वो सबको एक साथ मुक्ति देके न्याय देने के लिए एक बहुत बड़ा स्टेप, सबके साथ सबके विकास, ये विचार मन में रखते हुए आज प्रधानमंत्री जी के नेतृत्व में आज ये बिल पारित हुआ है।
There is only a 50 vote vote gap here, and you realize just how unpopular and how against the public mandate this bill is. And it is only because of the party whip and because of the two allies that they have just managed to get through by the skin of their teeth. It's a very dark day in India's secular democracy, where this government, by sheer brute force, has brought about a bill which is so patently unfair. It is sending a very chilling effect to the Muslim community. The message we are sending to the Muslims in this country is, know your place, we will show you your place.
वक्फ बिल उम्मीद जिसकी हम बात करते हैं, एक नई आशा है इससे, क्योंकि जो मुस्लिम समुदाय के बच्चे हैं, महिलाएं हैं, वो गरीब मुस्लिम परिवार जिनको इसके लाभ से दूर रखा गया। पिछले 75 वर्षों में 60 वर्ष कांग्रेस की सरकार रही और 1995 के बाद 2013 में जब इसमें संशोधन किए गए तो इतनी ताकतें दे दी गई कि मात्र 200 लोगों के हाथ में है 2 लाख करोड़ रुपए से ज़्यादा की संपत्ति। गरीब मुसलमान भाई और बहनों की भलाई हो गई होती, कांग्रेस ने वो नहीं की, चंद गिने चुने लोगों के हाथ में देकर रखा।
Meanwhile, the Lok Sabha early Thursday confirmed the imposition of precedence rule in Manipur, with members across party lines supporting the decision but slamming the centre for the situation in the state. Meanwhile, Union Home Minister said that the government has taken all possible steps to bring back normalcy in the state, with Sayoni Ghosh of TMC saying that her party too supports a resolution but favors early restoration of peace. Let's listen in to what the Union Home Minister said.
दिसंबर, जनवरी, फरवरी और मार्च 4 महीने से वहां पर हिंसा नहीं है। सरकार शांति प्रस्तापित करने के सभी प्रयास, उच्चतम प्रयास कर रही है। कृपया इसको पॉलिटिसाइज न करिए, और पॉलिटिसाइज करना है तो फिर डिबेट होगी, उसमें जवाब भी पॉलिटिकल देना पड़ेगा, मगर मैं ये नहीं चाहता। मान्यवर, ये कहा गया कि अविश्वास प्रस्ताव, कोई अविश्वास प्रस्ताव रिकॉर्ड पर नहीं माने। कांग्रेस पार्टी के लिए अविश्वास प्रस्ताव लाने के लिए इतने विधायक ही नहीं है कि वो अविश्वास प्रस्ताव लाए। मेरा सदन के सभी सदस्यों से विनती है कि सरकार चाहती है कि जल्द से जल्द शांति हो, जल्द से जल्द पुनर्वसन हो, और जो जख्म लगे हैं उस पर मरहम भी लगाया जाए।
It's time for a short commercial break. Lots more news and updates coming up on the other side. Stay tuned.
One of the worst earthquakes hit Thailand recently, and the tragedy is still unfolding. You can see some sniffer dogs here. Authorities have told me that they had located some vital signs, but they have not been able to pull anyone out. Question as to how did the 4 Chinese nationals manage to get inside such a highly fortified area. They managed to get in. They were successful in getting some 32 documents that established that Chinese connection to this site. It's also about a larger conspiracy that could be at hand. Whether the Chinese materials were substandard, all of that will have to be investigated.
When we spoke the last time you were in India, you did mention that you've actually spent more time in India than American universities. I remember you saying that, and a lot of your thought process has been conditioned by the time you've spent in India. Those formative years, they really shaped you. What, according to you, has been your biggest takeaway from your experiences and learnings during your time in India?
Well, I grew up with Indians. From the age of 5, I was surrounded by Indians. This was a boarding school. So morning, noon, and night, we had Indian friends. Our teachers were all Indian. And as such, Indian values would have automatically permeated within me and shaped me. But more precisely, it is in the classroom. We studied Indian history, ancient history, in civilization, medieval India, modern India, the fight to independence. So all of this would have shaped me, the person I am, and my worldview. But if you ask me one specific thing that has really had a lasting impression on me, it is the National Cadet Corps, NCC. So I took part in the NCC, and I enjoyed.
April 2nd, 2025. In a few moments, I will sign a historic executive order instituting reciprocal tariffs on countries throughout the world.
You are watching the World 24/7 on the NDTV network. We've got an action-packed bulletin lined up for you. Let's begin with the top stories you need to know. Trump unveils sweeping new discounted tariff policy aimed at putting America first. He declares his tariffs will send a clear message to global trade rivals that we can no longer afford to be taken for a ride. Donald Trump announces 26% discounted reciprocal tariffs on India, describes tariffs by New Delhi as very, very tough. The new duties also include a 34% tariff on China, a 25% on South Korea, 24% on Japan, and a 20% on the 27-nation European Union. Trump's reciprocal tariffs decision promises to ruffle feathers worldwide as nations brace for the economic storm and world leaders begin reacting. Trump has tried to frame his newly unveiled tariffs as very kind, but some experts are questioning that assertion. Stocks slumped, bonds surged, and gold hit a new high as markets braced for the impact of US President Donald Trump's sweeping reciprocal tariffs. Trump announced a baseline 10% tariff on all imports with far higher levies on some trading partners, particularly in Asia. Prime Minister Modi will be in Thailand, where he will hold a meeting with his Thai counterpart and attend the 6th BIMSTEC summit. The BIMSTEC summit will bring Prime Minister Modi face-to-face with Nepal's Prime Minister and Bangladesh Chief Advisor Mohammad Yunus, among others. European visitors to the UK will now need a new online entry permit as the British government shakes up long-standing travel rules. Travellers from Europe will now need a digital electronic travel authorization permit. Our big focus, US President Donald Trump unveils sweeping reciprocal tariffs, announcing baseline 10% duties on all imports and much higher rates for some nations. In fact, that entire list is playing out for you. Trump singled out major US partners for imposing trade barriers he deems unfair, with India and the European Union facing 26% and 20% tariffs, respectively. In fact, Trump said, they do it to us and we do it to them. He announced a staggering 34% tariff on goods from China in his Liberation Day speech, railing against foreign cheaters and foreign scavengers. In fact, Trump said the US will charge an import duty of 26% on India and 34% on China. But this announcement represents the largest upheaval in American trade policy in decades. US tariffs will approach levels not seen since the 1930s, as some experts argue. China, by the way, is moving to restrict companies from investing in the US, giving Beijing a bargaining chip in future trade talks with Washington. This is what Bloomberg is reporting as we speak. In terms of the market impact, Donald Trump announced his tariffs shortly after trading ended on Wall Street, and US stocks have already plummeted in after-hours trading. Asian stock markets have plunged as gold reaches record highs. For further clarity from Washington, D.C., let's go across to my colleague Nick Harper, who joins us with the lowdown. Nick, take us through the initial reactions to these sweeping tariffs on Ground Zero. Many are saying this announcement was complicated and manufacturers are actually scrambling to determine the exact implications for their operations.
Well, that's absolutely right. I think many people have been trying to crunch the numbers over the last few hours, not just to check the veracity of some of those numbers put out by the White House, but also trying to understand what it will mean for each individual country, because it is a complicated list. There is that baseline 10% tariff that's being imposed on any good from any country coming into the United States. But then those reciprocal tariffs on some countries that Donald Trump has targeted, including, as you mentioned, India, who's now facing that 26% tariff because the United States says that India imposes 52% tariffs on US goods entering India. And on top of that, there's 25% tariffs being put on any foreign cars being imported into the United States. So there's plenty to try and grapple with here, but also some suggestions that the numbers that the White House have put together it doesn't quite add up to exactly how much the individual countries actually impose. The reaction has been varied. As you'd imagine, a lot of Republicans are backing the president, but there have been some throughout the course of the day and even in the week ahead of this Liberation Day announcement who have been petitioning the White House to try and cool their jets, to suggest that these type of plans will have major implications, mainly to their constituents who could end up paying higher prices, as you would expect. The Democrats have reacted angrily to much of this. We've heard from Chuck Schumer, the Senate minority leader, saying this is a reckless, inflammatory trade war. A congresswoman from the House, Terry Sewell, saying that this will be the largest tax increase for families in American history. It's bad for consumers, she says. It will mean that prices will skyrocket. We're undoubtedly going to see plenty of reaction from countries over the coming days. Donald Trump's expecting that. He says he will be getting complaints, and he's also expecting that many countries will now be petitioning the White House to try and do some sort of deal to avoid these tariffs. Bear in mind, those reciprocal tariffs are due to start next Wednesday, the 9th of April.
Right, Nick. Also, meanwhile, economists dispute Donald Trump's claim that the U.S. is kind to only levy tariffs on half of what other countries charge the U.S. In fact, U.S. stock futures also cratered as Trump unveiled these sweeping tariffs.
Yeah, quite incredible. The stock market reaction, I think, is as expected. Stock markets don't like surprise. They don't like change. Something like this, the upheaval it will produce, has meant that the Nikkei in Japan has already dropped 3% as trading opened. We'll see what the Wall Street stock markets do when they open tomorrow morning US time. But already the suggestion is that the Dow Jones will lose about 1,000 points.
Meanwhile, Nick, White House's senior trade advisor Peter Navarro had claimed that Trump's proposed tariffs would actually bring in $6 trillion in revenue over the course of a decade. Experts have pointed out that if this is achieved, it would not only be the largest tax increase in U.S. history, but would also triple the tax hike that was enacted back in 1942 to finance World War II. Is this being seen as a realistic goal, this $6 trillion figure as we speak?
Well, there's plenty of numbers that have been thrown around. Another number is 600 billion to 1 trillion in the course of just 2 years. That's the amount that the White House is saying that these tariffs will bring in. But there is some suggestion that won't be the case. If you hark back to the tariffs implemented during the first Trump presidency, the vast majority, about 91% of all the revenue raised from tariffs imposed to China, was then used to bail out American farmers who simply were no longer able to sell their products like soybeans to China. So there is that slight problem, that suggestion that all of this could cause a recession, that it could cause prices to rise, and we could once again see bailouts for a whole range of different industries across the US who simply will find it much harder to sell their products abroad if other countries introduce retaliatory tariffs as a result of what we've seen today from Donald Trump.
Right, and Trump's comments as far as India are concerned, Nick, he said India has been tough on tariffs. He's raised questions about what our modus operandi is. But in terms of the future of Indo-US relations, could this tariff increase escalate tensions between the two nations, or will it prompt more collaboration as far as trade reforms are concerned? Have you been picking up on anything? What are the experts and big business players saying?
It's very difficult to tell. I mean, the suggestion would be that imposing this level of tariff would simply cause problems. It wouldn't solve them. We saw a tremendous friendship between the leaders of the US and Donald Trump and Prime Minister Narendra Modi during his first term in office. The thinking was that that would continue during his second term. But doing this to an ally of the United States, as he has done with other allies and trading partners like South Korea, Japan, imposing much higher tariffs on them than that baseline 10%, suggests that they will see problems. There will be rocky times ahead for that relationship between the President and the Prime Minister. The hope is that perhaps they can get in the room together, they can do some sort of trade deal, they may be able to reduce that imbalance that the US President says is out there. But all of that is really just a vast unknown at this stage. And with that plan to impose a 26% tariff on all Indian goods, the US president is laying down a marker, a very strong marker, a marker that might cause a real rupture in relations between New Delhi and Washington.
In fact, Nick, as we speak, many say that Trump's announcement was awash with insult, as if the rest of the world had looted and scavenged off America, ransacked America. I mean, these would be shocking claims if they had come from any other US president. Yet, today, it's water off a duck's back. Nick Harper, as always, thank you so much for joining us with the latest from Washington, D.C. We've also lined up the crucial takeaways from Trump's tariff announcements. Listen in to the sound bites.
Tariffs give our country protection against those that would do us economic harm, and many people were looking to do us economic harm. Maybe not so obviously, but they were doing tremendous economic harm. But even more importantly, they will give us growth. These tariffs are going to give us growth like you haven't seen before, and it'll be something very special. I think you're going to remember today, it's going to be a free nation that we're dealing with. We're going to have a very free and beautiful nation. It's going to be Liberation Day in America, and it's going to be a day that hopefully you're going to look back in years to come and you're going to say, you know, he was right. This has turned out to be one of the most important days in the history of our country. India, very, very tough, very, very tough. The Prime Minister just left, and he's a great friend of mine, but I said, you're a friend of mine, but you're not treating us right. They charge us 52%. You have to understand, we charge them almost nothing.
Protege o Brasil nas relações comerciais com o mundo. E é importante dizer que na hora que qualquer país quiser interferir ou alterar as relações diplomáticas e comerciais com o Brasil, esse projeto ele permite que o governo brasileiro possa agir e estabelecer os enfrentamentos necessários.
We are going to fight these tariffs with countermeasures. We are going to protect our workers, and we are going to build the strongest economy in the G7. In a crisis, it's important to come together, and it's essential to act with purpose and with force. And that's what we will do.
We will stand up for Australia. We will continue to make the strongest case for these unjustified tariffs to be removed from our exporters. Our existing free trade agreement with the United States contains dispute resolution mechanisms.
The world is one family. Esos principios que en un foro de estas características son compartidos, nos parecen de sentido común, hoy día están siendo puestos en cuestión. Cuando se imponen aranceles de manera unilateral, sin considerar las reglas mutuamente acordadas.
Well, as you've just heard Mark Carney's remarks, Canada has said that they will respond with countermeasures. My colleague Maha Siddiqui has been tracking all the finer developments for us. She joins us live from Vancouver at the moment. Maha, we're given to understand that several Republican senators have now joined Democrats to pass a resolution that would block Donald Trump's tariffs on Canada, which is being seen as a rare rebuke just of his trade policy just hours after he announced his sweeping plans.
Yes, absolutely. There are some Republicans like Paul Rand who have said that they are siding with that resolution that has been brought in by the Democrats. This is largely this provision is applicable in the emergency measures that were taken on the northern border of the United States that is still in place. And that provision allows for any Republican or Democratic representative to push in for blocking it. And that is exactly what the Democrats did. And some of the Republicans have sided with it as well. President Trump has responded badly to it, saying that this is some sort of a Trump anti-Trump derangement syndrome that these people are suffering from. But clearly, this kind of blocking that we are seeing a bipartisan support for with regards to Canada from the US representatives, from their members of parliament, goes to show that they value the relationship between the US and Canada, and also believe that the trade between these countries, that is US, Canada, and even Mexico to a large part, has been going on seamlessly under the free trade agreement that they already had, which was earlier NAFTA, but that was renegotiated during the previous tenure of Donald Trump, which is now known as CUSMA in Canada. And they feel that things were going smoothly and seamlessly, and that this will be a big jolt to that. Now, as far as the current situation is concerned, Parmeshwar, let me point out that even though Canada and Mexico's name was missing from that list that Donald Trump had shown, there are 4 kinds of tariffs already in place for Canada. First, 25% tariff on all non-CUSMA compliant goods, 25% tariff on automobile sector, 10% tariff on energy sector. So these are already in place. Canada has said, and you just heard Mark Carney there saying that Canada will respond with purpose and with force. So we'll have to wait to see. Apart from the $30 billion goods that Canada has already said that they will levy tariffs on, are they going to go in for further $125 billion worth of goods and tariffing that in the sense of reciprocal tariffs? We'll have to wait to see what the announcement is going to be on that count.
As always, Mahado, thank you so much for joining us with the latest developments and the lowdown. Well, Donald Trump, many experts highlight, he's finally making good on his campaign promises to build that wall, but instead of steel fencing along the Mexican border, it will be constructed from tariffs and will enclose the entire United States. In fact, we spoke to experts earlier on NDTV about the likely impact this is likely to assert in India. Here's what Angela Chitkara told us.
So multinationals, companies, publicly traded companies are having difficulty in business planning. And, we're also thinking about, when they're making decisions, it's not like they're making decisions on their own. They're part of a bigger ecosystem of stakeholders. Take, for example, the auto sector and the exposure that the auto sector has to, in markets like Canada and Mexico. And so now, if we're thinking now about reshoring, nearshoring, friendshoring, that, takes time. But if you think about the U.S.-India relationship, I think naturally multinationals that already have a presence in India and markets like India will continue to expand in India and also rethink their U.S. strategy, which would also include the reskilling of American workforce in the United States.
All right.
It also, take time to recreate these new supply chains and also de-risk. Companies are planning on, thinking about de-risking away from the US and also diversifying their talent pool.
Well, analysts and experts say it will be months, if not years, before many US companies or sectors have the confidence and the cash to invest in the way Fortress America supporters hope. Longer still, maybe, before US car workers or farmers feel truly confident about paying down their debts and spending again. But it makes perfect sense, therefore, to emphasize currently that the uncertainties that Donald Trump has just unleashed. Some say it's hard not to feel, yet again, that part of what Trump's decision was the sheer thrill he gets from his power. In fact, some experts are arguing that he glories in the way the world hangs on his every move, as the world must when its largest economy is controlled. We'll keep tracking everything on this front. For now, we're slipping into a very short break. Back in a moment. Do stay tuned.
One of the worst earthquakes hit Thailand recently, and the tragedy is still unfolding. You can see some sniffer dogs here. Authorities have told me that they had located some vital signs, but they have not been able to pull anyone out. Question as to how did the 4 Chinese nationals manage to get inside such a highly fortified area. They managed to get in. They were successful in getting some 32 documents that established that Chinese connection to this site. It's also about a larger conspiracy that could be at hand, whether the Chinese materials were substandard. All of that will have to be investigated.
When we spoke the last time you were in India, you did mention that you've actually spent more time in India than American universities. I remember you saying that, and a lot of your thought process has been conditioned by the time you've spent in India. Those formative years, they really shaped you. What, according to you, has been your biggest takeaway from your experiences and learnings during your time in India?
Well, I grew up with Indians. From the age of 5, I was surrounded by Indians. This was a boarding school. So morning, noon, and night, we had Indian friends. Our teachers were all Indian. And as such, Indian values would have automatically permeated within me and shaped me. But more precisely, it is in the classroom we study.
Well, Prime Minister Modi will be in Thailand, where he will hold a meeting with his Thai counterpart and attend the 6th BIMSTEC summit. Now, this summit will bring Prime Minister Modi face-to-face with Nepal's Prime Minister KP Sharma Oli and Bangladesh's Chief Advisor Mohammad Yunus, among others. From Thailand, he will depart for a 2-day visit to Sri Lanka. But just take a look at what to expect from the 6th BIMSTEC summit.
Bangkok is set to host a pivotal BIMSTEC summit on April 3rd and 4th, where Prime Minister Narendra Modi is expected to sign a landmark maritime transport cooperation pact. This isn't just about trade routes. It's a strategic move in a region where alliances are shifting rapidly. The Bay of Bengal Initiative for Multi-Sectoral Technical and Economic Cooperation is an international organization of 7 South Asian and Southeast Asian nations, housing 1.7 billion people and having a combined GDP of $5.2 trillion. Member states include Bangladesh, Bhutan, India, Myanmar, Nepal, Sri Lanka and Thailand. Meanwhile, Bangladesh's Chief Advisor Mohammad Yunus recently claimed his country is the only guardian of the ocean, igniting diplomatic ripples. His comments on China's role and India's landlocked northeast come amid growing tensions between Dhaka and New Delhi. It also casts a shadow of doubt on the likely meeting with Prime Minister Modi at the summit.
7 states of India, eastern part of India, called 7 Sisters. They are landlocked country, landlocked region of India. They have no way to reach out to the ocean. We are the only guardian of the ocean for all this region. So this opens up a huge possibility. So this could be an extension of the Chinese economy, build things, produce things, market things, bring things to Nepal, China, bring it out to the whole rest of the world.
With Nepal, Myanmar and Thailand grappling with political instability, the summit's significance escalates. Amid these turbulent tides, the BIMSTEC Charter, now in effect, aims to anchor regional cooperation, focusing on security, connectivity and disaster response. As the Bay of Bengal's waters ripple with promises and perils, the BIMSTEC summit could chart the course for South Asia's future. Will this maritime pact be the anchor of stability or the storm before the calm? With Arjun Samar Mahindran, Bureau Report for NDTV World.
Tracking all the latest developments in Thailand, my colleague Vishal Vivek joins us live from Bangkok at the moment. Vishal, take us through Prime Minister Modi's plan of action in Bangkok.
So he will land in Bangkok any moment now. It will be about 2 to 3 hours from now when he could land. And then he'll head to the meet with the PM here, Thailand PM. It was at the invitation of the Thai PM that PM Narendra Modi has decided to visit Thailand. It's a key visit. It's an important group, the BIMSTEC group, but there are several challenges, as the report mentioned earlier, it has to have some kind of cohesive approach. It has been around for 30 years now, but we were at a meeting which served as a precursor to the main summit today, in which a lot of experts said that this group needs to come together. There has to be some objectivity because it's been there for a while, but hardly anyone knows about this group. People talk about ASEAN, SAARC, but they're not equally aware about this BIMSTEC group. Some even suggested that the name of this group should be shortened. It's too long. People are barely able to pronounce it. So there's several criticism around it, but leaders are here, all the leaders are here. This is where the meeting, the big meeting is supposed to happen. We are right outside the hotel. You can see the flags of all the countries, the member countries, talking about the countries. Experts have also said that BIMSTEC group could include even more countries. It does not represent the whole Bay of Bengal region. So all of that was mentioned in that meeting. And this is where PM Modi is also expected to come to attend the meet. He will be heading to another hotel when he lands here. But the main summit will be held here. All the big leaders are here. There are some reports suggesting, but it's not confirmed as yet, that there could be a meeting between Prime Minister Modi and Mohammad Yunus. So that will also have to be seen with close eye. Back to you, Parameshwar.
As always, Vishal, thank you so much for joining us with the lowdown from Bangkok. It's a crucial week ahead, not just for the BIMSTEC agenda, but the Prime Minister will also be heading to Sri Lanka after he's wrapped up his schedule in Thailand. The Prime Minister will be in Thailand, and where he will also hold a meeting with his Thai counterpart, as my colleague Vishal Vivek is reporting live from Bangkok. The BIMSTEC summit will bring our Prime Minister face-to-face with Nepal's Prime Minister KP Sharma Oli and Bangladesh Chief Advisor Mohammad Yunus, among other leaders. We'll keep tracking the latest developments for you as far as Bangkok is concerned. For now, we're stepping into a very short break. Thank you so much for investing your time in watching this edition of The World 24/7.
One of the worst earthquakes hit Thailand recently, and the tragedy is still unfolding. You can see some sniffer dogs here. Authorities have told me that they had located some vital signs, but they have not been able to pull anyone out. Question as to how did the 4 Chinese nationals manage to get inside such a highly fortified area. They managed to get in. They were successful in getting some 32 documents that established that Chinese connection to this site. It's also about a larger conspiracy that could be at hand. Whether the Chinese materials were substandard, all of that will have to be investigated.
In today's interconnected world, India's voice is more crucial than ever. When India speaks, the world listens. At NDTV World, we are that voice, bringing you intelligent and insightful news from India and beyond. From geopolitics and diplomacy to economic shifts, migrations, tech disruptions, and the stories of our diaspora. We cover the news that shapes our global future. NDTV World, your new home for global news, is here.
From interesting tech startups to industry-leading companies, politics, sports, culture, curry, cricket. Oh, there's so much to talk about. Like me, if you too thrive on interesting conversations, this is a show you cannot miss. Watch this space to know more about all matters and all people that make Britain what it is today. Out of Britain, with me, Radhika Iyer.
This is NDTV, and you're watching NDTV 24/7.
It's 6 a.m. and you are watching NDTV 24/7. If you're tuning in from the United States, well, what a day it's been. We've got an action-packed bulletin lined up for you. Let's begin with the headlines you need to know. Donald Trump unveils sweeping new discounted tariff policy aimed at putting America first. In fact, global leaders are reacting to these tariffs. Trump declares his tariffs will send a clear message to global trade rivals. He says we can no longer afford to be taken for a ride. Donald Trump announces a 26% discounted reciprocal tariff on India. He describes the tariffs by New Delhi as very, very tough. The new duties include a 34% tariff on China, 26% on India, 25% on South Korea, 24% on Japan, and 20% on the 27-nation European Union. Trump's reciprocal tariff decision promises to ruffle feathers worldwide as nations brace for this economic storm and world leaders begin reacting. Trump has tried to frame this newly unveiled tariff policy as very kind, but some experts are questioning that assertion. Well, US President Donald Trump unveiled sweeping reciprocal tariffs, announcing baseline 10% duties on all imports and much higher rates for some nations. In fact, Trump singled out major US partners for imposing trade barriers he deems unfair, with India and the European Union facing 26% and 20% tariffs respectively. Trump said, they do it to us and we do it to them. In fact, he announced a staggering 34% tariff on goods from China in his Liberation Day speech, railing against foreign cheaters and foreign scavengers. The US president said the US will charge an import duty of 26% on India and 34% on China. And speaking about India, Donald Trump described tariffs by New Delhi as very, very tough. He went on to say that their prime minister, as in Prime Minister Modi, just left the US. He's a great friend of mine, but he said to him that you're a great friend, but you've not been treating us right. In fact, to quote him, he said, India charges us 52%, so we will charge them half of that, which is 26%. But this announcement represents the largest upheaval in American trade policy in decades. US tariffs will approach levels not seen since the 1930s, as some experts argue. In fact, for further clarity on what's happening and how the world will react and the ripple effects, we'll go across to Daniel Block in just a moment, but listen in to what Donald Trump had to say.
Tariffs give our country protection against those that would do us economic harm, and many people were looking to do us economic harm. Maybe not so obviously, but they were doing tremendous economic harm. But even more importantly, they will give us growth. These tariffs are going to give us growth like you haven't seen before, and it'll be something very special.
And joining us live from New York at the moment, Daniel Block, who's a senior editor of Foreign Affairs and also a contributing editor at the Washington Monthly. Daniel, as always, thanks so much for making time for us. What a day it's been. But more tariffs equal more anxiety and uncertainty for American businesses and consumers. So would you call these tariffs a short-sighted plan?
I mean, with the caveat that I'm not a trained economist, I would. That seems to be the consensus among trained economists. And it also just seems to make a certain amount of logical sense. And for many reasons. One, to pick up on what you said, is uncertainty for American businesses and for global businesses. So for a while, one of the things that American presidents had tried to do, including Trump during his first term, is to get companies to leave China and to make their manufacturing lines, to move them to other countries, including India or Vietnam. And many countries did that, or sorry, excuse me, many companies did that. They started to move their supply lines over. And now suddenly those countries are getting hit by tariffs as well. So if you're a business, you don't have many good options. You're not quite sure what's going to happen next, where your supply chains are going to be safe. And in addition to that, there was no real sense of how major the tariffs were going to be until Trump announced them today. So companies are scrambling. They don't really know. They don't know what's going to happen next. The whole process has been quite opaque. So yeah, just tremendous uncertainty.
Daniel, just hold on. We have another bite of Donald Trump lined up for our viewers. Listen in to what the US president had to say regarding these new policies.
I think you're going to remember today it's going to be a free nation that we're dealing with. We're going to have a very free and beautiful nation. It's going to be Liberation Day in America, and it's going to be a day that hopefully you're going to look back in years to come and you're going to say, you know, he was right. This has turned out to be one of the most important days in the history of our country.
Right, Daniel. So the reciprocal tariffs that Trump's levied, they will give the United States the highest tariff rates of any industrialized country, is what we're given to understand. And it's not even close to what the US president is saying, is what many experts warn. People say that now the US president is risking a recession. Is that what you're picking up on? What are experts saying on ground zero?
That's exactly what we're hearing. That the risk of a recession has gone up significantly. Right. And not just a recession, but the risk of inflation. There's a kind of nightmare scenario that these tariffs could push the United States into, of what's called stagflation, where the economy is stagnant or contracting. So you either have a recession or almost no growth. And at the same time, you have rising prices. And this is the last time this really happened in the United States was in the 1970s into the 1980s. And it's very difficult to get out of, because the normal tools of monetary policy and stimuli that you would use become kind of, if not ineffective, they exacerbate one problem in order to solve the other. So for example, the Federal Reserve, which is the United States' central bank, could hike interest rates if we have high levels of inflation. But if the economy is contracting, if jobs are going away, if we're having a recession, that will add fuel to that fire.
Indeed. In fact, some say for Trump, tariffs are not so much a negotiating tactic as a policy, a new revenue stream, and a made in the USA commitment. But what are people on ground zero saying? What have the initial reactions been from the opponents?
I mean, Democrats have been very critical. They argue kind of what economists have been saying, that this will produce inflation, it will slow economic growth. And I think just generally a sense that if your goal is to get more revenue for the United States government, this is not the right way to do it. The main thing that tariffs do in order to generate more revenue is they effectively act as a sales tax on Americans, because companies that are paying those tariffs will pass on the increased costs to American consumers in the form of higher prices. And sales taxes tend to be quite regressive as far as taxes go, because if you're a wealthy person, you can afford to pay more. But if you're a poor person, you can't.
Right. In fact, one cannot also ignore those who argue that things may not look so benign, however, when the rubber hits the road, because it's inevitable that enthusiasm will be dulled either among the public or in markets when the inevitable price hikes are passed on to consumers, and when inflation, as you've highlighted, and the cost of mortgages begin to rise, when real wages will remain flat, or even when the investment stalls, the US economy starts to experience a Trump slump. Would you then say, Daniel, that these tariffs are quite the opposite to the new paradigm of political economy that the Democrat capitalist world so obviously and urgently needs?
I mean, it may be. This is an interesting moment for the Democratic Party in the United States, where the Democrats performed well in a series of special elections yesterday. And now these tariffs are giving them kind of a new opening. And so there's a bit of new economic life, a bit of new political life in the opposition in the United States. That's for sure.
Right. In fact, Daniel, do stay on with us. We've got Maha Siddiqui joining us live from Vancouver at the moment as well. Maha, thank you so much, as always, for making time for us. Countries like Canada, where you are, Brazil and South Korea already are voicing strong opposition to Trump's announcement. In fact, US allies like Canada and Mexico and the EU are among the most vocal critics of Trump's sweeping policies so far. Mark Carney's told reporters that Canada will fight Trump's tariffs with countermeasures.
Yes, he said that Canada will react with purpose and with force. And there's already been a meeting after the announcement by Donald Trump at 4 p.m. Eastern time in Canada that Mark Carney held. One meeting was held even before the announcement by US President Donald Trump, but the exact countermeasures by Canada have not been announced so far. The countermeasures that were put in place earlier, which was with regards to $30 billion worth of goods, that remains in place. That was the first tranche of the reciprocal tariffs that Canada had imposed. But right now, because that board that you're showing, which President Donald Trump had shown today, listing out the names of the countries and the reciprocal tariffs that the US will impose, did not have the names of Canada and Mexico. So at the moment, there is some amount of uncertainty as to how much that reciprocal tariff will be. We know that a baseline reciprocal tariff of 10% has been announced for all goods that are brought into the US. So overall, at the moment, what Canada is dealing with is a 25% tariff on aluminum and steel and a 25% tariff on the automobile industry, which is fully made cars as well as auto parts. And that really is the big hit for Canada. And it is a very politically sensitive issue as well. The province of Ontario, clearly where a lot of auto manufacturing is located, is one where we are seeing a lot of action with elections due in Canada on 28th of April. We are seeing leaders go there, talk to these automakers, the sectors, the workers who will be impacted by this. Canada is really bracing up for an impact on the auto sector. And it's not just an easy impact. It's not an impact that we're only going to see on Canada. As the previous speaker there was pointing out, the impact will be felt by consumers in the US as well. And also we must point out that many of these sectors have a very complex supply chain, which means that while one part is being made in one part of North America, another part of the same car can be made in another part. So we are seeing a very complex supply chain running between Canada